Welcome back. And the week of the Democratic presidential debates is upon us. In fact, they are just in, I believe, uh, 2 short days or less than 2 short days, whatever. They're in one day. So you can tell I'm a little excited. But the craziness is just getting started. And if this is how these people are behaving in June of 2019, over a year away from the actual election, imagine how mad it's going to be once there is a nominee or once the actual primaries are underway, which is in 6 or 7 months. Here are some things that I found, some crazy stories. Now, this is something that I'll admit, this is from February, and I guess the roots are from a little earlier, and it's from Splinter, which is from the Kotaku family of whatever, of crap, of awful sites, Jezebel and Gizmodo. So they are addressing this rumor that has been spread that Elizabeth Warren takes risperidol, which apparently is an antipsychotic drug. And that's why I think Elizabeth Warren is going to have a lot of problems, because you have a lot of these people who know that Elizabeth Warren can't be trusted. She has lied herself around the political arena for years and years concerning her would-be Native American ancestry. She's also had a sketchy history. If you're a progressive, okay, I'm not a progressive, but in 2016, a lot of people expected her either to run for president or to support Bernie when he ran for president, Bernie Sanders, and instead she just did not run and endorsed Hillary Clinton. And of course, that was a huge sticking point for a lot of people because they felt that she was putting her identity, her gender, ahead of her actual values, which when she's on the Senate floor or whatever, she's all about, oh, I'm against Wall Street, I'm against big banks, and in reality, Hillary Clinton was the candidate for Wall Street in 2016. Not to say that Donald Trump was the candidate who was against Wall Street, but if you were going to pick one of the two, it would have had to have been Hillary Clinton. Now, the reason that I think that Elizabeth Warren is going to be a problem is that right now the Democrats and their media shills are doing double duty trying to protect her, since she seems to be the best fallback at the moment to Joe Biden, who seems to just be, he has no energy. You see him at these rallies. He's kind of mush-mouthed and goes around and seems to forget what he's talking about, forget who he's talking to, and lapse into this stuff about the segregationists. In fact, this was an interesting story. So Tulsi Gabbard, so she got into some heat this weekend when she said, so it says here, she ripped Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren for trashing Joe Biden's segregationist talk. Now, I thought this was a little bit of surprising stance for Tulsi Gabbard to come out and say. And she said, Joe Biden did not celebrate or coddle segregation, as his critics have unfairly misrepresented his important message to score cheap political points, the Hawaii Congresswoman tweeted on Friday. So it says here, it's his critic. I agree with Clyburn and Joe Biden. In order for Congress and the president to get things done for the American people, there needs to be civility in Washington and in the country, the ability to work with those we disagree, even those who hold some views which we abhor. In order for Congress to work for the American people, we need to find common ground with each other. That is not possible without civility. We don't need another president who is going to continue to divide our country. We need a president who will unite us. United we stand, divided we fall. Now, I don't think I've made a secret of the fact that I think Tulsi Gabbard, of the people that are running in the Democratic primary, would probably be the only one that I'd consider voting for ahead of Donald Trump. Maybe, not, and that's like a big maybe because she's not exactly a Second Amendment friendly politician. But here was a strange statement, and I didn't really agree with her. I don't think that if you believe in the cause of integration, if you believe in the idea that people should live in the same society, not have these legal obstructions to people using the same facilities because of their race, I don't necessarily see why you would cooperate with people like James Eastland and Herman Talmadge that Biden was talking about. But there are ways to look at it. And I guess to play devil's advocate, here's how it goes. There were a lot of issues over the years that people had to get over regardless of differences on other issues. For example, in the 60s and 70s, you had for example, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. So people across the political spectrum, and this isn't a good thing, but people across the political spectrum, whether you're talking about hardcore Republicans or New Deal Democrats, voted in the Senate to approve the Gulf of Tonkin resolution that ended up getting the U.S. involved in Vietnam. So you had people that were segregationists, you had people who were civil rights supporters, you had people who were, a little bit on the fence. Most of them voted for the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And once the tide turned against the Vietnam War, you also had some people who were staunch segregationists who were against the war. For example, William Fulbright was a huge segregationist from Arkansas, and he ended up being against the war. I think John Stennis, who was from Alabama, was for the war. The unfortunate truth is that sometimes people who are they seem to have views that are so beyond the pale of what you would believe in. They happen to be in positions of power. Nowadays, for me, for example, the best person to fulfill that role would be someone like Eric Swalwell. I don't think that, or Kamala Harris. I don't think that I could ever see myself standing on the same platform, shaking hands on any issue with either of those people. But what Tulsi Gabbard and Joe Biden are talking about is that exact spirit of bipartisan or I guess, cooperation between people of different ideas. And then she got raked over the coals for it by people like Jamarl Thomas, who's one of the bigger supporters of people like Gabbard on YouTube, at least. A lot of those people would say, well, look, at a certain point, you have to draw the line. Are you going to, so when you start saying, I'm going to cooperate with segregationists, what's next? Are you going to cooperate with people like John McCain, people like Max Boot, these hardcore warmongers, which is exactly what the Democrats are doing right now. They're actually forging ties with some of the worst neocons that there are. So some people that are even many people who traditionally would be more hawkish would consider these people to be just rabid warmongering Looney Tunes. So this is a legitimate debate, and I don't think Tulsi Gabbard is really going to benefit from it. And I think she should have probably let this one, let this grounder roll away. Other crazy things that have been happening. So, like I said, Elizabeth Warren is sucking up a lot of the media attention because I think they are identifying her as probably the most reasonable person who could replace Joe Biden and still not really represent the progressive agenda like Bernie Sanders. Bernie is saying he wants to forgive all student debt, but even Slate, which is pretty far to the left, I wouldn't say it's the most far left, but it's pretty close. Even Slate is saying Bernie Sanders wants to forgive all student debt. His plan doesn't make a lot of sense. And they say one of the reasons is, by itself, student loan forgiveness is sort of an odd priority for the left. It would do an enormous amount of good for many financially burdened young adults, but a disproportionate share of the relief would go to upper class, middle class, and wealthy families. Currently, about 1/3 of the debt is held by households in the top quarter of the nation's income distribution. So that's a fair point, and I think at this juncture, I'll put forward my feelings on student loan debt. I think that people who sign papers telling them how much they would pay and how the fee structure would go, or their or I guess the interest rates would go, I think that those people, they can't blame the institutions. They can't blame the government. They can't blame this structure where people have to pay for their own education, because they did sign. And in many cases, these people were attracted by the allure of colleges that were very, I would say, chic, places like Barnard in New York, or UC Berkeley, or Arizona State, depending on what type of person you are. That was the way it was marketed when I was going to college, or when I was going to go to college. In fact, I ended up going to college pretty late. And they would sell you essentially on the college's culture, not on whether it would give you real value in your working life. So in many cases, you were marketed to as, as far as whether it was a party school or whether it was a school that you would be able to enjoy a lot of Greek life, or a school with a lot of, I guess, fitness, or good weather, or good drinking, all that type of stuff, more weed. and then yes, there is an academic element to it. I'm not negating that. This isn't entirely a joke. But people were putting a higher priority on being able to fit into the right type of college than they were on figuring out what they were going to do with a college degree and whether they could pay for it. And I essentially went to, I guess you would. It's not a community college, but it's barely like a couple rungs above. And to be honest with you, I've taken courses at a community college, and in some cases, they're better than at the university level. But I got the value that I paid for. I was able to get 2 degrees in mechanical engineering, and I've paid for both of them in full. Both my FAFSA loans and my private loans through a private grant making organization, which I couldn't qualify for a grant, so I had to take out a private loan. And essentially, one year after I got out of school, I was able to pay for all of those loans in full, because I did get a pretty good internship, and it helped me a lot. And I was able to avoid this debt trap. A lot of people don't avoid the debt trap because they fall for the name brand of the college. So they'll go. You saw this whole Oberlin thing that was going on. If you go to Oberlin College, you can typically pay, I believe, $50,000 a year in tuition. Now, of course, some of that is swallowed up by student aid, Pell Grants, things like that. Some of that it might be swallowed up by scholarships. Let's say you have a music scholarship because you're able to play the flute. So you're the skin flute if you've got the right professor. You know what I'm talking about, ladies. So I don't know if it works that way. If you're in the chat, let me know. Stormy Horseface Daniels, I know, watches some of my content. So let me know. Let me know if that's your experience in college, Stormy. Anyway, there are ways for you to bring that tuition down, but at the root of it, you're going through semester after semester. I think for a full term, it's $50,000 a year at a place like Oberlin. And then most of their programs are not for necessarily in-demand careers. You could be going there for English. You could be going there for to learn business administration, which I don't even know if they offer there. But at the end of the day, you're paying a premium for a degree that you could probably get in a lot of other places. And then the real reason that you would be going to the college, the only other thing that would get you some sort of advantage from going there would be two things. A, the reputation of the college, which is, a lot of these colleges have a suffering reputation right now, so it's not exactly helping you. For example, if you went to either Oberlin or Mizzou, or, God forbid, if you went to Evergreen State College, all of those have awful reputations and would probably hurt your chances of getting a job. And the other reason you might go to these places is the alumni network. Alumni networks are ways that you could link up to people who used to go to the school. They have an interest possibly in having new people, get into the career fields that they're in, and that's an advantage. But those advantages don't in and of themselves pay for your student debt. So I would say much of the student debt crisis, okay, I know we're off on a tangent, is caused by people not understanding, A, why they're going to college, B, what they're going to use their college degree for, and C, exactly what they're signing up for in terms of the financial commitment. And when you're so in the dark, when you're in this process about how you're going to do all of this, you're basically asking for trouble. This isn't something that is a joke. And I'm not going to lie and say, well, I knew the whole time, I would pay back my loans within 2 years of graduating. But I was strategically trying not to take out as many loans as I could. I only took out on 3 different instances, and it was really, a tough decision for me because I needed them all 3 times. So that's it for the student loans. I think it was, it's going to be a very strange debate, and I personally would say that I am absolutely against student loan forgiveness. I don't care about these people bringing me sob stories about how they went to Grand Canyon State and they were there for 15 semesters and all they got out of it was a stupid squirrel dentistry degree. That's not my problem. I'm sorry, but you have to have strategy in life, some strategy. I'm not saying you have to play 5D chess, but think a little, okay? You can't get into this much debt. It's really, it's a problem. It's a character problem when people do that. And you can't blame society for yourself and your failings. Other things, Beto is proposing a war tax. I'm not sure how this makes any sense. Maybe I'm missing something, but he's saying that he's saying it would propose create a war tax that would fund a trust fund dedicated to veterans' benefits, including health care and disability compensation. The tax would go into effect at the start of any newly authorized war. O'Rourke's proposal states, and would not apply to households with members currently in the military or veterans. Here's how much different households would pay under the proposal. For those under the 30,000 bracket, $25. Less than 40,000, $57. Less than 50,000, $98. Less than 75,000, $164. Less than 100,000, $270. Less than $200,000, $485. More than $200,000, $1,000. And I think he's trying to make this the point that this would reduce the likelihood that wars would be declared because people would start to feel it in their pocket when their politicians went to war. But the fact of the matter is that I don't think this would dissuade people from voting to join a war. In some cases, these politicians, they're afraid that the voters would come back to them and say, hey, well, I have to pay $270 for this now, which doesn't sound like a huge amount of money if you're making $100,000 a year or slightly less than that. But it's still, people don't like to pay an extra tax. But the fact is that some of these politicians, once they leave office, let's say they get voted out, they could just go and work as a consultant for one of these defense contractors. So it's not really effective. I'm not sure what the logic is. I'm not going to dwell on Beto today because I don't think his candidacy has much of a chance. And to be honest with you, a lot of people beat up on him anyway, so maybe we'll save that for a different time. I'm just saying I don't understand it, and I think I need someone else to explain exactly how this would work to prevent us from getting into another war. Other things. So there's two more issues. Mayor Pete, we mentioned in a video a couple of days ago that he has a Black Lives Matter problem. And look at this. This is something that I haven't seen much coverage of, although this could probably change. But he had a town hall in South Bend. It didn't go quite as planned.
People get a chance to have their voice heard and give us a space to listen. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So for some reason, the picture was really screwed up in the middle. And the volume.
Okay. I want to say something. I know we all are angry. Well, first of all, my name is Samuel Brown. I have marched in this town. I have pride in this town. We're all upset about that. But I want you to listen to me. Please listen. You don't have to agree with me. Just listen. Let's hold our anger. Ask the questions. Okay. 2017. Wait a minute. I want to talk.
Now someone else is talking. We will give you an opportunity to talk if you wait your turn.
So this shouting didn't start at this moment, but it really started to get out of hand right after.
Thank you. Samuel Brown, would you finish? Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. We're going to take a moment and we're going to listen.
So people were like really freaking out at a certain point, and this was probably the worst sight I've ever seen somebody come back to as a presidential candidate, going back to their district.
Thank you.
Let me do this before we move on. Let's have a word of prayer. Will you bow your heads with me? Bow your heads, please. Father, in the name of Jesus, we ask now, God, for your peace to be in this place. Settle anxiety, oh God, and help us to process the information to be respectful one to another. We thank you for your presence and for the respect that the people shall give unto you. In Christ's name, amen.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and let Mr. Brown continue with this question, and then we'll go to the next young lady right over here, if we may.
Okay. Look. The chief of police, the mayor came out to listen to us. They did come out to hear scream and complain. Everybody just calm down. We can listen and talk. 2017, I was just as frustrated as you are. But you know what I did? I didn't scream at the mayor, I didn't scream at Chief of Cops. I went. They got a Central Police Academy. I don't want to be a policeman, but I want you to know what they go through. That's how we can deal with them. They're human beings like we are. There's things that need to be changed. We're going to get it done. Kids like you told me here tonight. We're going to get it done. We're not going to get it done. But give them a chance to listen to our complaints. Don't scream at them. When I went through that 8 weeks of training at the South Community Peace Academy, I understood a lot. I had Paul Wachowski when things in the community were going haywire. He came personally. He didn't send nobody. He came personally.
How you expect anyone to talk about respect in an oppressed society? What is respect in an oppressed society? How how can you blame the victims of last night in an oppressed society? So what you can do today, and I'm not playing, and I got 2 minutes. What you can do today, there are ways to assess the way people think. Do you understand? Get the people that are racist off the streets. We only want the person. You can do that by Friday. Please let me calm down because I need you to hear me. You can do this by Friday of next week, this week, whatever. You can assess by giving each one of your people in your department 500, 600, whoever, an inventory. You will get data back. Anybody in denial or polarization gets off the streets. Intercultural development inventory. If you don't want me to do it, because I am a qualified administrator, if you don't want me to do it, Dr. Mitch Hammer is the person that created the scientific tool that he has used in police departments. Reorganize your department by Friday of next week. And based on data, get the racists off the streets. It's disrespectful that I wake up every day scared. It's disrespectful that I have 3 boys out at the beach today. What to do? Get them off the streets. Any racist is at the damn desk. Put them at the desk. Make them do paperwork. Put the people that care about the fact that you're different than me, honey, I love your hair. Make them the ones out there on the streets.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, that's enough of that. Sorry I made that go on for so long. I wanted you guys to get a feel for how chaotic it was. And unfortunately, so I don't really have a side to pick in this, whether it's the people who are the protesters or Buttigieg, but I'm just going to say he's at a huge disadvantage here. It looks like his town is a bit of a powder keg. I don't know if this is really representative of South Bend as a whole. I think South Bend has like about 100,000 residents, and it's not like this is like the entire, the entire population here. But he's just one disturbance away from his entire campaign going completely up in flames because, as the mayor, when you're running at a higher level, you're basically saying, well, look at all this harmony and this good administration that I've accomplished at the low level, at the local level. These are the type of results that I'll bring at the national level. And it just isn't, it's not going to look that way if you're going to have people who are shouting at these meetings, or worse, you could have actual disturbances, riots in the streets, and things like that have happened. South Bend isn't that large, but it's happened in other cities of similar size. So, yeah, he's at a huge disadvantage. Compare that to someone like Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris could not have the same effect because she, as a senator, all she does is she represents California. So she goes and she represents them in the Senate to pass laws. She doesn't administer California. So things that go wrong in California, they really fall into the lap of people like Gavin Newsom, or on the local level, people like, whatever the hell the mayor of San Francisco's name is, or what's his name, Eric Garcetti, the mayor of LA, who's, by the way, the target of a recall campaign right now. Last story before we close, Cory Booker has really, this is strange.
Candidate Cory Booker, apparently quite willing to overlook the anti-Semitic rhetoric of Louis Farrakhan. He was just asked on a campaign stop if he would avoid Farrakhan because of hateful views that Farrakhan spouts off, but watch how he responded.
I'm not one of these people that says I wouldn't sit down with anybody to hear what they have to say. I'm very familiar with Minister Louis Farrakhan and his beliefs and his...
Yeah, well, seems like Senator Booker is really trying to pick and choose which kind of hate speech he wants to denounce, because he just spent the last week calling out Joe Biden for all of Joe Biden's comments on segregationists. And don't get me wrong, those senators that Biden spoke of had some pretty hateful, despicable views. But keep in mind, that was, 50 years ago? Farrakhan's anti-Semitism, it is quite fresh. And just to refresh your memory, here's a little taste of it.
Here the Jews don't like Farrakhan, so they call me Hitler. Well, that's a good name. Hitler was a very great man.
You know what they do? Call me an anti-Semite. Stop it. I'm anti-termite. And Farrakhan, by God's grace, has pulled the cover off of that satanic Jew.
So, Cory Booker.
So, you know, a lot of you last year, maybe if you were still following this channel, I did a lot of stuff on Farrakhan and just raw footage of his. I've been against banning him from Facebook, against banning him from YouTube, because honestly, why block people from, you know, seeing these things, you know, for themselves? You know, if people want to make the judgment themselves whether they like this or not. It's not my now. It doesn't make me feel good what he's talking about, but the fact of the matter is that Louis Farrakhan is the leader of a mass movement, and people are going to support him through thick and through thin. And the more you try to muzzle him, the more people are going to look for him. It's the Streisand effect. Cory Booker, on the other hand, so the real issue isn't Louis Farrakhan. Louis Farrakhan has the same First Amendment right as you, the same First Amendment right as this channel, the same First Amendment right as me. You get the picture. The real issue is Cory Booker, because he said anti-Semitism is un-American, is anti-American, and this was just in March. And this was when he apparently met the AIPAC New Jersey delegation. It says some 300 people from AIPAC's New Jersey delegation gathered earlier this week for a meeting with Democratic presidential hopeful Senator Cory Booker. The event took place despite a campaign by the progressive Move On organization, which called on the presidential candidates to boycott the pro-Israel lobby's annual conference. AIPAC's Mort Friedman joked that contrary to reports that major candidates were boycotting the conference, Booker was live and not a hologram. I want to show you something, said Friedman. I'm going to put my arm around him. So then they openly embrace him. And this is one of the problems I have with AIPAC. They're willing to talk. They're willing to basically, and this is something that I see as a problem and why I disagree with Tulsi Gabbard. If you are going to cooperate with people who talk out of both sides of their mouths and promote their careers, and then they get to a point of higher office, and then they basically take a dump on you, you don't deserve the benefit of the doubt anymore. That means that you were suckered, and that's exactly what AIPAC is. AIPAC is a club of suckers. Okay, they've said for over 20 years, we support this person because they support Israel. We support that person. No. You support these people because they gave you false promises, and that means that you're a sucker. Israel is not political to me. Booker told the crowd I was a supporter of Israel well before I was in the United States Senate. I was coming to AIPAC's conferences well before I knew that one day I would be a senator. And then he says anti-Semitism is un-American, is anti-American. Booker continued to violate most deeply our commonly held values. We must take steps on the global stage against a vicious act that targets Israel. Sucker! Sucker! He said he would meet Farrakhan. You have to pick either one, Cory Booker. You can't at the same time talk about how anti-Semitism is un-American and then say, well, I guess I'd meet with Louis Farrakhan. You can pick one or the other. And I wouldn't support him either way. I don't believe Cory Booker. I think he's a disingenuous shill. But the least he could do is pick a side. But apparently he can't even do that. That's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute, on Minds.com, and if you want to donate on Subscribestar, all of those, the screen name is Chef Leopard. You can also find me on Gab at Starscream85, and for the moment on Parler at Razor Ray. I don't really see many people using it, but if you want to hit me up on Parler, go ahead.